I'm 32 years old and I really struggle to express my emotions. And I guess it all starts from when I was a little boy. And I'm making this video because I really wish I could have been able to express myself more fully from a younger age. And as a result of this lack of capacity, I've really struggled with life's challenges. So in the name of vulnerability, I'd like to share my experiences and hopefully you can share yours. Just before we get into this, a little disclaimer. I'm by no means perfect, and I have noticed in myself that sometimes I just struggle to get certain things. And if there's anything I say that may offend you or you think is wrong or triggering, just let me know. So why don't we make it a space of learning and open discussion. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what happens when boys don't cry and why I think it's important for boys to cry. A bit about my story and my upbringing in this environment and how I went about deconditioning myself and now reconditioning myself. So I asked myself the question, what happens when boys do cry? And in short, they live. Saw quite a crazy stat on the World Health Organization, and 80% of the world's suicides are men. And it's largely due to toxic masculinity norms and one's inability to connect with their emotions and express themselves. And when you look at a problem like masculine and feminine energies and the effects of it, and understanding the root and the fruit of a problem, this seems like a massive red flag. And I'm sure you've heard the expression, big boys don't cry, or don't be such a girl, or be a man. It's insane. This is expressed to boys and young men when they are feeling vulnerable. And I saw a lot of this growing up as a kid. And in fact, I thought I was being taught that these are the characteristics of being a man. In hindsight, it's just feeding into toxic masculinity. The scary thing is, then these boys grow up into men thinking that confidence and composure and strength are key characteristics of what it means to be a man. So in short, I was then taught to limit my emotions and then damage myself by suppressing them. You see, the thing here is that emotions, whether they are positive or negative ones, they still serve a purpose. And one of the four noble truths of Buddha is dukkha, the idea that suffering is an unavoidable part of existence. And it's crazy to think that this is an actual approach taught to boys, that one must just stiffen their upper lip to life's challenges. And sure, at some point one has to acknowledge your hardships are your hardships and try and prevent yourself from becoming a victim of it. You have to be able to feel them and acknowledge them first in order to learn from them. I suppose then you have to ask yourself, why is it important for boys to cry? And it may seem obvious, but for me, as a little boy growing up, expressing any sort of emotion, especially those of distress, was seen as a sign of weakness. And I remember as a kid, I really didn't want to cry in front of other people, or I was ashamed of my anxiety or confused about it and not wanting to express it. And I remember my mum coming into my bedroom one day and asking me if I was okay. And I was saying that I didn't know how I was feeling. The closest thing I could describe it was that I felt threatened. I felt like something was trying to attack me. And I remember at that point, she said, "Are you feeling anxious?" And then I connected feeling with the words. I mean, I can still remember this day like it was yesterday. And it was that point I realized that I've been feeling that feeling for as long as I can remember. And it's those formative years that really shape who you are as an adult. I also realized after some time that life's not going to get any easier. And at what point do I want to start to take control over the way I feel? And I find this sad. Then men are conditioned to be limited to a narrow range of acceptable emotions, such as anger or apathy or frustration. And then they're taught from a very young age that it's almost unacceptable to express any emotion such as fear or hurt or sadness. As a result, I spent far too long completely unable to connect with my true, full range of emotions. And this kind of pushed me away from my true nature. And I'm not talking about the true nature as the hunter-gatherer, provider, strength, protector. I'm talking about the true nature that exists outside of what society has built up and expects men to be. Whew, it is hot. Let's just take your full range of emotion. Everything that you feel, all the joy and the hurt, all the things that you express to your friends and your family, and the relief and the feelings that you feel. Imagine I just turned that all off. Now, the thing that I realized is that emotions don't just dissolve and disappear. For balance, they need to come in and then they need to go out. That's why I've sort of dedicated my life to yoga, because it's a way for me to allow my emotions to move through my body. But if there is no outlet, then they are stored in the body and then manifest elsewhere, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, or as a result in my life, the angst eventually built up and burst at the seams in the form of anger, frustration, confusion, eventually into anxiety, depression, dishonesty, addiction, and at the same time, life wasn't getting any easier. And I'd love to get your take on this, and I'm going to share a little bit about my experience in this. But it seems to me that there needs to be a safe space for boys to be able to express themselves emotionally and build that connection with their inner voice, because then their emotions are allowed to move through their body, and in doing so, you then free up space to evolve and grow and learn and soften in your masculine and feminine. And honestly, I could harp on forever about the benefits of yoga and how it's helped me soften into my masculinity. I'm also not sure whether it's just me at my age or whether the guys at school now are being taught to express themselves, but I don't know. Even just the other day, I saw on Netflix there was this gamer who sadly lost his mother, and then he said to the camera that he was going to deal with it by just burying himself in his game because he would rather do that than cry. Now, I know that hardships are relative and it's difficult to compare, but I think it's actually quite easy to compare. And I think that's part of the problem. And I often just downplayed my struggles because I grew up very privileged. And then I just turned a blind eye to my emotions. And I still say to myself, what do I really have to feel bad about? I mean, it could be way, way worse. There are people who have no homes, who have no food. And in doing so, I just invalidate my own suffering. I don't allow myself to feel it, privileged or not. And this is not the same as just acknowledging your suffering. And wouldn't you agree that showing young boys and young men how to process their emotions and how to deal with masculine energy is something that relates to all backgrounds? As a child, I felt a lot of pressure to gain my father's approval, to become successful, to make something of myself, to not waste my privilege. So I was sent to a very prestigious all-boys school where I felt threatened by the older boys as a new boy. I mean, there was initiation as you came in your kind of like first year. I mean, it reached a point where I was lying to my parents so I could get off school for a whole week just to avoid my turn to get beaten up. So I was very scared for the whole of my first year. But then as you kind of go through the years leading up to being a senior, you kind of feel more and more relief. And at the same time, you then start to feel power that you get as you climb the ranks. And you know what the really sad thing is? That when I reached my senior year, I fell into the exact same cycle. Hurt people, and you then stuck in this cycle of trauma. And the really sad part was that I thought I was doing the right thing. I was doing what was expected. I had gone through this process. It was supposed to turn me into a man, and now it was their turn to go through the same process, the same initiation. And I knew how bad it felt to be scared as a new boy, and yet I just continued the cycle. Over a decade later, I look back on that experience and feel a lot of shame and regret for my actions and for failing to be of proper support to a vulnerable boy and be a mentor in a healthy way. And at the end of this experience, I felt like I knew it all. Like I was a man now. And when I stepped into my first lecture at university, the teacher immediately named the school I went to. And in reality, I was more comfortable expressing myself to women, completely unable to express myself to men, ill-equipped to deal with any of life's challenges, and quickly took to distracting myself. And eventually, these distractions turned into bad habits, which took years to undo. And then once the emotions got deep enough into my body, it then manifested into some pretty serious mental health issues, which I'm still unpacking and still struggle with. And I still struggle to express myself emotionally. So, if there was some practical advice I could have given my younger self on how to deal with masculine energy in a more healthy way, I would have said this. Firstly, and most importantly, begin to develop a physical relationship with your body. And in my opinion, this is 80% of the battle. And if you've yet to do this, you're going to have a really hard time dealing with all your masculine energy. For me and my default, when I'm not moving my body and I'm not in a good place, I feel agitated and aggressive. I've got this fire inside of me which pushes everything out of the way. I retreat into my space, close myself off emotionally, and eventually burst at the seams. But I've realized, and especially with yoga, that if I move my body regularly, I get to release all these emotions and free up so much space to process masculine energy and a wider range of emotions. Now, the reason I love yoga so much is that it's non-competitive. There's no end goal, and you'll learn through your practice that it's just you in yourself, in your body, in the moment. And there is so much power in that. Secondly, I would say begin to develop a connection with your emotions. Begin to put some words to how you're feeling. Learn to express yourself. Learn to feel the relief of expressing your emotions from an early age. And in this way, you allow your emotions to move through your body instead of being stored into the body. Now, that's easier said than done because there will be naturally stored emotion in the body, which will manifest behaviorally. So I would say the third thing would be learn to audit your behavior. And what I mean by this, learn to notice masculine behavioral traits. And I still have these thoughts, and I still find myself doing this when I'm not careful of what's going on in my head, or if I'm not looking after myself. These are things like competing, comparing, feeling defensive or feeling aggressive, sizing something up. All these harder emotions, which are very primal, defensive, protective thoughts. Now, when you begin to notice your thoughts, begin to notice these behavioral traits. It starts off as a thought and then becomes a behavior. You separate yourself from them, and in doing so, you learn to respond to a situation and instead of react to it. And lastly, get into nature more. There's nothing more humbling than being in nature. I mean, the meaning of humble is being closer to the ground. We learn so much from the movement, just being outside, allow ourselves to connect with our own true nature. And it's only through the stillness that we allow ourselves to see that there's no difference between me and you. And that, in my opinion, is true compassion, where you can start to respond in your life and treat others as you would yourself. I really don't think there's a one-stop shop on how to become a better man or deal with masculinity. But those are some of the things that helped me become more compassionate, more curious. That's allowed me to be more open and learn, develop, and grow over time. And many cultures have ceremonies or rites of passage taught by elders, which help young boys develop into men. And I think there's an interesting topic around that in terms of our lack of that nowadays in modern society. And I will continue to learn and share everything I know about balancing masculine energy. I'm currently reading a nice book about it. I'll share the link down below. And it's in my hopes that you will also continue to learn and develop and grow closer to your true nature. So if you've enjoyed this video and you would like to reach out and share something, please do. I would love to hear from you. And if the comment section is too much, that's also totally fine. You can always DM me, either maybe on Instagram. And if you'd like to join in on this journey, you can always subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.